Joining us online is Adam Guillette. He's president of Accuracy in Media. And actually, he is one of the people who volunteered to take the COVID vaccine. Adam, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So let's talk about the COVID vaccine. There was an attempt by Democrats, and it's been ongoing for months, to sort of suggest that the vaccines were not going to be safe so long as they were developed by Operation Warp Speed, or rather, anytime while Trump was president. So you were one of the people who actually volunteered to take the vaccine. Which vaccine did you actually take?
I got the Moderna vaccine.
Okay, and why don't you tell us about your experience with that? How was that?
Sure. It was actually a bit of nothing. I got the first dose a few weeks after I signed up. Initially, they said I'd get Pfizer because Pfizer was ahead at the time, but Moderna pulled ahead. So I got the first dose, no side effects or anything. 4 weeks later, I got the second dose. That night, I was up all night with chills. The next morning, I had a mild fever, but I took some Tylenol and it went down. And then the next day, I was pretty much all better. Ran 5 miles, ran 10 miles the day after that.
Wow. So, okay, well, that's good news. So you've seen this thing politicized, and the media have been complicit in politicizing it. What do you make of the media's take on the vaccination process?
I mean, it's morally outrageous. It's exactly what you'd expect from them, but you'd hope they behave a little bit better during a global pandemic, particularly a pandemic that they build up as, the end of the world. Well, finally, there's something here to save us. And instead of celebrating that, the New York Times wrote smear pieces about the vaccine. Andrew Cuomo, as you saw, said he was going to make sure perhaps New York would have to double check the work of the CDC and the pharmaceutical companies and the clinical trials because they're obviously COVID experts in New York. It's been outrageous to see them put politics before human life.
So let's talk for a second about the politicization of the release of the vaccines. There's been a lot of talk about whether the vaccines the news about the vaccines, particularly Moderna and Pfizer, that those were released a little bit late, that if those had been accelerated by a couple of weeks, maybe it would have made a difference in the election. What do we actually know about the development of the vaccines and whether this was politicized from the inside?
I can't say anything in terms of what's going on inside Pfizer and inside Moderna, but I do find it difficult to believe that there's conspiracies on either end with the numbers or maybe even the timing of all of this, because to suggest that there were delays or that, this was being done and rushed through by Trump is to suggest that everybody at Pfizer and Moderna was in on it. Everybody at the CDC, all the people at the clinical trials who I meet with when I've gotten my doses and go for my checkups. If there was real politicization on either side of it, I suspect you'd hear some whistleblowers coming out and talking about it, but we don't see that.
So obviously, as president of Accuracy in Media, you've watched as the media have covered all of this. It seems like they were spending months downplaying the possibility of a vaccine being available before the election. President Trump will go out there and say that there are going to be some people who are able to get a vaccine before the beginning of the new year. And the media would say that this was terrible. How could he say such things? Of course, now it appears that there will be availability of the vaccine for particularly vulnerable people by the middle of December. How bad has the media's coverage generally of COVID been?
I mean, as I know, it's probably been about the worst thing we've seen from the media. And for a living, we hold them accountable with investigative journalism and citizen activism. For a living, we expose the bias in the activism of the media. But in a scenario, as we said, that they built up to be the worst thing in the history of mankind, to totally push aside any positive news and to smear the vaccine, it's outrageous. The New York Times ran a headline talking about how they're using secrecy and not sharing the data related to the vaccine. It was a total clickbait story they ran. You had to go 5 paragraphs in to read that that's typical of what they do with all of their new medicines. These companies aren't going to share their trade secrets before they've released a brand new medicine. But it totally fit the mindset of the audience they were going after. It totally, fit their political goals to smear the president and take away hope from the American people. Whether or not Trump was going to be accurate about saying that we'd have it by the end of the year, no one could fault an American president for trying to offer hope in trying times. And it's just disgusting to see the media try to tear it down.
We're speaking with Adam Guillette, president of Accuracy in Media. So, Adam, I've been saying all along that maybe the media's trump card throughout this entire election cycle was their talk about COVID-19. They've presented COVID-19 as an almost quasi-religious virus. If you are woke, it won't affect you. If you go out and you protest for social justice, it won't affect you. If you protest against lockdown, it will affect you. If you're a Republican, then probably you'll get hit by it. If you're a Democrat, then you definitely won't get hit by it. If you don masks under any circumstances, no matter whether they are cloth masks or whether they are N95s, they are equally protective. Whereas if you are standing 20 feet away from somebody in the middle of the street and you are nowhere near them and you're not wearing a mask, then you are obviously a bad person. Meanwhile, Team Trump obviously completely blew all of their COVID handling, whereas Joe Biden had a plan from the very beginning. The media, I have to estimate they were worth at least 10 points to Joe Biden in this last election cycle on the COVID story alone.
You know, I do think that their coverage is absolutely horrible, but we and others have spent decades exposing their bias, and they are trusted less than ever. It still provides damage, of course, but in our fragmented media landscape where conservatives might read Breitbart, leftists are going to watch MSNBC and read the New York Times, their effectiveness, in my opinion, has been diminished dramatically over the past few decades. I'm far more worried about social media titans, and I'm far more worried about social media sites like Now This and BuzzFeed, because they speak to people from all ideological spectrums, and they speak to a lot of easily influenced young people. I think they're far more dangerous than anything CNN can offer.
That does frighten me. And it seems to me that a lot of these social media tech bros are sort of being cajoled and wheedled and threatened into shutting down the means of distribution of information. And I think that some of them are very warm to it. I think Dorsey, particularly at Twitter, is very warm to the idea that he's going to shut down any information that he doesn't particularly like. But Zuckerberg has given a bunch of speeches in which he's talked about how he likes open dissemination of information, and Democrats have been ripping him for it. They've been basically trying to reestablish establishment media dominance in the tech sphere by trying to get these tech companies to shut down dissemination of information from alternative sources. It's incredibly dangerous.
It's frustrating. And particularly, as I said, the sites taking advantage, or the news outlets taking advantage of Facebook and Twitter particularly well, those worry me. BuzzFeed and Now This built their followings of tens of millions with clickbait and puppy videos. That allowed them to bring in people from across the ideological spectrum. The same can't be said for CNN or the New York Times or MSNBC. They're really just preaching to the choir. The smart ones in this go after the culture. They go after, outlets that are non-traditional, and they're the ones who could break through the echo chambers. Our side needs to be much better at it instead of focused on preaching to the choir.
Adam Guillette, president of Accuracy in Media, really appreciate your time, and I'm glad that everything went well for you with the vaccine and gives optimism for a lot of people who are looking forward to getting it.
Thank you so much. My wife says I haven't turned into a zombie yet, and I'm very excited about that.
Perfect. That is good news, because presumably she'd be prepared in any case. Adam, appreciate the time.